Before I tell you anything, I need you to look at this cat. Look closely, because something about this picture is already wrong. This photograph is often presented as Unsinkable Sam, the black and white cat who supposedly survived the sinking of 3 warships in 1941. He looks exactly right. Serious expression, naval collar, the sort of face that suggests he's seen things and would prefer not to discuss them. Then you read the tag. It says HMS Amethyst and 1949. Wrong ship, wrong year. 8 years too late. You're looking at Simon, a completely different naval cat. So that seems to settle it. The famous photograph is wrong. The story is probably fake, and we can all go home slightly disappointed. Except there really was a cat. A black and white cat named Oscar was photographed in Derry in December 1941. Newspapers publicly tied him to the recently sunk aircraft carrier, HMS Ark Royal. The cat existed. His résumé is where things become unstable. Ark Royal was torpedoed on November 13, 1941, and sank the following morning. Contemporary reports describe sailors rescuing cats from the ship, although the reports couldn't agree on how many cats there were, what colors they were, or exactly which ones survived. This isn't ideal record-keeping, but it does suggest that men evacuating a sinking aircraft carrier were also trying to evacuate cats. Among the animals that emerged from the confusion was Oscar. By December, he was living at the Sailors' Rest in Derry with its manager, Margaret Hill. A newspaper photographed them together. The image is grainy and small, but it exists. That gives us something solid. There was a black and white cat called Oscar. He was being publicly presented as an Ark Royal survivor. Margaret Hill had him. Then the newspapers began building backward. On November 18th, 4 days after Ark Royal sank, Reuters described Oscar as a former cat of the German battleship Bismarck. Bismarck had gone down almost 6 months earlier, after a battle that killed more than 2,000 people. The later legend says British sailors found Oscar floating on wreckage and took him aboard. None of the Bismarck survivor accounts that we examined mention him, and an extensive Admiralty interrogation report, compiled from 75 selected survivors, doesn't mention a cat. That silence is suspicious. It is not proof. The report was created to investigate the ship, its crew, its weapons, and its final battle. It wasn't an inventory of every unofficial animal aboard. A hidden or unofficial pet could have escaped the interviews completely. So the Bismarck story hasn't been disproven. It's a contemporary claim that still has no independent support. Reuters had already found the irresistible angle. Oscar had, in its wording, lost 2 of his 9 lives. A famous enemy battleship, a British aircraft carrier, a cat moving between them. The story arrived with its own headline. 1 week later, sailor testimony repeated the Bismarck connection. Oscar now had something that looked like witness authority. Then the 3rd ship appeared. HMS Cossack had helped pursue Bismarck. Months later, in October 1941, it was torpedoed and eventually sank after attempts to tow it failed. 159 crew members were killed. The November 18th account said a destroyer had rescued Oscar from Bismarck and that he was later transferred to Ark Royal. It didn't clearly say he had been aboard Cossack when Cossack sank. By December 9th, the story did. Northern Irish newspapers now explicitly connected Oscar to Bismarck, Cossack, and Ark Royal. Ark Royal sank on November 14th. 4 days later, Oscar had a Bismarck past. By November 25th, sailors were repeating it. By December 9th, Cossack had completed the 3-ship résumé. 25 days. The legend didn't spend decades slowly gathering details. It arrived almost fully assembled before Christmas. Cossack fits perfectly between the German battleship and the British carrier, transforming a remarkable two-ship story into a three-ship miracle. It's also the weakest link. No earlier report we found places Oscar aboard Cossack when it was lost. The most cinematic version of his rescue, with Cossack crossing the wreckage and finding the cat among the dead, comes from a much later secondary book published in 1987. The later the scene appears, the more clearly everyone seems to remember it. Once the three-ship story existed, Oscar stopped being merely an animal rescued from Ark Royal. He became a character. Margaret Hill said he reacted to sailors' voices, and she worried that passing sailors might carry him away. Apparently, the main danger facing the world's most shipwrecked cat was being returned to sea by men who liked cats too much. She also said Oscar preferred water to milk and helped himself from flower vases. Honestly, this may be the most convincing detail in the entire biography. In March 1942, Oscar appeared on a forces radio broadcast. A newspaper reported that Oscar himself made himself heard to millions of listeners. The content was apparently a cat making a cat noise. By then, his backstory had made that a broadcast event. The legend had moved beyond naval reporting and become entertainment. Then it acquired art. Georgina Shaw Baker, an artist known for animal portraits, created a pastel of a black and white cat sitting on floating wreckage. Royal Museum's Greenwich now holds it under the title Oscar, cat from the German battleship Bismarck. The painting is real. What it proves is that somebody painted the story. The museum's online record doesn't establish when Baker painted it, whether she ever saw Oscar, or what source she used. It also acknowledges that no Bismarck survivor account identifies the cat, and that the famous Simon photograph is incorrect. Then the record suggests that Baker presumably had some reason to paint Oscar. The logic begins to loop. A story inspires a painting. The painting enters a museum. Over time, the existence of the painting begins to feel like support for the story that inspired it. But a painting can't travel backward through time and become an eyewitness. It can make a legend feel physical, though. And once Oscar's story had newspapers, witnesses, a portrait, and increasingly precise rescue scenes, it needed only one more thing: a good photograph. Which brings us back to the cat wearing the tag. Simon served aboard HMS Amethyst during the Yangtze incident in 1949. He was injured by shell fire and treated for his wounds. He helped control rats while the ship and crew were trapped, was credited with supporting morale, and received the Dickin Medal. Simon had the documented heroic career Oscar's legend appears to promise: a named ship, a dated photograph, records, injuries, official recognition, a medal. And then his face became proof of somebody else. No reliable source shows where the mix-up began. There's no evidence of one person deliberately replacing Oscar with Simon. The image simply looked right. Crisp photograph, handsome black and white cat, official naval tag. Everything the legend seemed to require. The correction wasn't hidden deep in an archive. It was hanging around Simon's neck. A poorly documented, heroic cat had become more convincing through the face of a genuinely documented, heroic cat. Simon's history remained in the records, but his photograph circulated under Oscar's name. Compare that with the genuine 1941 photograph associated with Oscar. Simon's picture is sharp, expressive, and official-looking. Oscar's is tiny, muddy, and inconvenient. The false evidence looks definitive. The authentic evidence looks weak. Oscar existed, and contemporary reporting strongly connects him to Ark Royal. His Bismarck past remains uncorroborated, and the Cossack connection is weaker still. By then, though, the real cat was almost impossible to separate from what people had built around him. Sailors repeated the story. Newspapers gave it shape. Later writers sharpened the scenes. A museum preserved the image. The internet supplied a better face. Meanwhile, the actual Oscar fades from the reliable record. What remains is a grainy photograph, a few contemporary reports, a radio appearance, and one wonderfully ordinary habit involving flower vase water. A small, real cat drinking from a vase while an enormous life gathered around him. The real Oscar disappears from history. Unsinkable Sam survives everything. Still curious? Choose another strange thing before the sack opens. Like and subscribe.